Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. And today I just wanted to talk about another book from the International Booker Longlist, and that is White Nights by Urszula Honek and translated by Kate Webster. And so this was the kind of one, I think, on the long list that took probably most people by surprise, partly because they're a very small press. And therefore, this is sort of a book that hadn't been as heard of. But I think is a really interesting addition to this list, and I'm very glad that I've had a chance to read it. I won't really be going into spoilers for this, just because as a set of short stories, it doesn't really sort of contain spoilers in quite the same way that maybe a novel might. These are interconnected short stories, though, so there is some element of that. But I think my review of it won't end up really going into spoiler territory. And if it does, I'll mention before I go there. But anyway, let's get talking about this book. So this is a set of short stories that really focuses on that kind of feeling of kind of yearning that people get generally when they live in a small place, when they're kind of getting to teenage years or just beyond. And there's that feeling of restlessness and wanting to move beyond it. And the short stories sort of seem to be mostly focused around that. There's a set of characters who all live in the same small town. It's a town that sort of is surrounded by bits of nature. And so much of the writing really looks at both nature and the kind of actions of these young people. And the young people in the story have this real... their lives sort of have a sort of slightly humdrum element to them. Not in the kind of sense of going to work and work being really boring and all of that kind of thing, but kind of in a sort of waiting for something to happen kind of way. And so as a result, we see how these characters sort of, there are sort of various ways where they wander into the forest and they maybe look about what's happening there and there's a stillness to it, or they are talking about who's dating who or what's going to happen next with all of these sorts of things. And whereas that might not sound like the most exciting thing, there's something about the way that this is rendered in the book that I found really interesting, because there's something so... Okay, I've used the word quiet to describe books before, and fair enough, it's not always the best description. I think this book is a really good example of it. There's something about the point of view of this book where even when it's in the first person, there's still a bit of distance. Like, it still feels like we're watching somebody slightly removed from the action, watching everything. And what that kind of adds to these short stories, I think, is this sort of stillness, not only because of the nature of kind of what's happening and because it's physically set in nature, but there is a sort of sense to which characters are sort of just going through their lives, and there's a slight detachment from the narrator for each story that I found really interesting, because it sort of means that in some ways nothing is happening, but in some ways everything is happening. There's a sort of a lot moving under the surface. There's a lot of subtlety. There's a lot of slowness to this book. And so, even sort of shocking actions or characters having an argument with each other, that still has this sort of quietness to it, of sort of this detachment, as if we're watching somebody observe that, and at any moment they could just look in a different direction and move on and do something else. And there's something also about the fact that these are short stories that lends itself to that, because we're essentially watching sort of snapshots of all of these characters' lives and how they interlink. And so characters will recur between short stories, but each short story has this almost sort of episodic quality of sort of dropping in, seeing what somebody's doing, and then parachuting out again. And so as a result, I found this really sort of... unsettling is not the right word, but it kind of sets you on a slightly different footing right from the beginning in a way that I found really quite engaging. I'm really quite surprised by how the book's managed to achieve this. Yeah. It's sort of, it's difficult to really describe. I mean, the short stories will go through, for example, a character who, each individual short story might not have a lot in it. They might wake up, look around the forest for a little bit, and then have a conversation with somebody, and then it sort of ends. And that's not to demean these short stories. So much is going on under the surface in each one of those. But sort of plot-wise, there isn't a great deal happening. And I think that's what I mean by these short stories being quite quiet. There's a sort of stillness of inaction, and that's the sort of bubbling frustration under the surface of these stories, that there's so much going on, but on the surface, everything's relatively serene. You know, somebody does this, a thing happens, but it's not a big dramatic, now the whole thing's changed. It's sort of small increments of movement. And in some ways, I think that reflects this kind of tone of a small town that isn't really known for much, where people live and they sort of live and die there. That there is a kind of sprawl aspect to it. They kind of are in this small town, they go to the forest, these things happen. And I think that's what I found really captivating, is that it sort of manages to capture that really restless, under the surface kind of yearning for something to happen, for something to go wrong or to go right. Instead, these characters just sort of say, well, okay, I guess I'll see you at the bar later and we'll do this. And it's very muted, in a way that I think is really beautiful. I think this really works. Yeah, so I was really impressed by what this book does. I also just want to say, as a side point, as a physical object, this book is gorgeous. So this is a really beautiful front cover. And you know, sometimes some front covers, you look at them and you're like, yes, that is the mood of this book. Ta-da! This sort of slightly this black and white photo with sort of artistic but also very serene and quiet, but also a little unsettling. That's very much this book. And on a sort of physical note as well, just like the little little pages and everything, it's just really gorgeous. Anyway, so I think this is a really interesting one. I feel like this might be one of those dark horses that just appears in the shortlist and confuses everybody in a really good way. I think this is a really surprising and disarming book in a really great way. Anyway, I've been Bob the Booker talking about this book. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.